first country is Israel. Why didn't you expend political capital to change Israel's behavior like the 23 fines? Any dramatic measure taken in response to Israeli actions would have spurring a Republican backlash. That if the Biden administration were willing to expend political capital, there's a huge range of things that they could do to express their displeasure, recalling the ambassador reconsidering military aid. U.S. pressure is currently working as prevent 23 fines. Biden urged Prime Minister Netanyahu in a strong private message to halt his government's judicial overhaul. Biden's public remarks show the depth of the crisis between two allies created a political shockwave in Israel, and the U.S. specialists have likely helped convince Netanyahu to put the legislation on hold. Cohen 23 confirms yesterday. Netanyahu said Sunday he will not immediately resume controversial efforts to alter his nation's judiciary system. He's decided to take a timeout for dialogue. However, regulation means less political capital as Action 21 finds. Federal privacy regulation or legislation accompanied by political capital to overcome strong bipartisan resistance. It is likely that continued political alignment will be necessary. And Southlake 20 continues. Regularity bills of facial recognition are using of available political capital. This is uniquely necessary in an era of intense polarization Beckman and McDonough finds. Ideological polarization hallmarks contemporary Washington's political landscape. Announced to the president, ideological polarization makes amassing the votes needed to beat the status quo difficult, so gridlock frequently prevails. However, when endowed with abundant capital, facing a polarized legislator, it enables the president to pass policies. The impact is Hezbollah. Judicial reform decks the IDF's ability to combat Hezbollah and Iran and emboldens escalation by adversaries. INSS 23 finds the internal struggle absorbs the attention of the government and even the security establishment, undermining the ability to deal with the pressing security issues. There's no doubt that Israel's enemies draw encouragement from our internal rift and may even be tempted to undertake dangerous actions as a result. Violence in the Gaza Strip could spill over into Lebanon, drawing Iran and Israel into conflict. Tisdale 18 finds the biggest worry is Lebanon, or where Hezbollah is. If the Gaza violence continues and spreads, Hezbollah hardliners can make to try to intervene. Iran's leadership has repeatedly warned it will directly assist Hezbollah in any fight that Israel says will be eradicated. Avery 20 terminalizes that Pakistan might enter the war on the side of Iran that's introducing nuclear weapons, and by accident or miscount making the world uninhabitable. Thick clouds of smoke would rise and the population would perish. Pension to his aid debt. Aid debt is a big problem, but biometrics solved Darden 19 finds. In Prague conflicts, maintaining the neutrality and integrity of aid remains a major challenge. As one of the world's largest sponsors of humanitarian assistance, the US must ensure relief reaches those most in need. New technology can play a lead role as biometric registration, where individual aid recipients are documented and have their identities verified when they collect aid, has already emerged as a key tool in reducing aid fraud and refugee assistance. And the technology is only improving. McDonald's 22 finds. The result of 6 scientific research projects are expected to be useful in providing better humanitarian assistance around the world using biometrics. Data privacy is enhanced thanks to a decentralized system as well as in improved accountability. And the fast advances that are in technology offer huge potentials to unlock innovation for greater humanitarian impact. We've seen this empirically work with Syrian refugees. Long 17 finds. UN Jordan is implementing the world's first iris scan cash assistance program for refugees, and the program is strikingly cost effective, with 95 for every $100 donated going directly to refugee beneficiaries. It's contributed to a 20% reduction in the number of families living below the poverty threshold, and biometric identity verification has contributed to reducing fraud and duplicate payments, have reduced the cost to operate the program, ensuring that more money is available to support the eligible families. And usage is only expanding as crypto altruism 21 finds. 100,000 Syrian families now have the ability to purchase groceries. There are exciting plans to scale this program in a variety of social impact contexts. And this technology could revolutionize the way that aid is provided. This is key to stopping conflict. Garden 19 finds maintaining the neutrality and integrity of aid remains a major challenge. Terrorists are using charitable organizations abroad to raise and move funds as well as to dispense humanitarian services as a way of radicalizing individuals and building local support. Humanitarian assistance prolongs the very crisis that this aid is intended to ameliorate. There's 2 impacts versus women's healthcare. World Economic Forum 22 finds humanitarian crises interrupt the provision and usage of sexual and reproductive healthcare, leaving women and girls vulnerable. In 35 countries facing humanitarian crisis, maternal mortality was 1.9 times higher. Second is wartime sexual violence, as Bradley 13 finds. The consequences of this crisis have been catastrophic for women, and sexual violence is becoming used as a weapon of war. Inadequate assistance and growing impoverishment have led to vicious cycles in which women and girls have fled sexual violence and are exposed to exploitation as they struggle to find food and fuel to survive.
Okay, I'll think it is.
And then just like the bottom of the highlighting was cut out, just so y'all know.
Off-disclosure interpretation, debaters at the TOC must, on the open case wiki of 2022 to 2023 wiki, with the name and school, they intend to disclose the taglines, full citations, and concurrence of any piece of evidence which they read in their case in a previous round, and round reports at least 30 minutes before the round starts. To clarify, open source and round reports with positions read/gone for in every speech violation. They don't disclose TOC round 7 screenshots through standards. 1, argument quality. A world without disclosure rewards debaters for running arguments not because they're good, but because their opponents won't know how to respond. Disclosure forces debaters to equality, increasing education. Second is inclusion. Schools with big rooms who bring more students to judges are better connected, who's got more rounds and have more flows. Disclosure equalizes that info disparity, also forces big programs to put their prep on the wiki, giving everyone access to the best, paywall up-to-date evidence, and allows smaller programs to keep up-to-date with the meta 3 evidence ethics. Disclosure allows debaters to check each other's evidence before the round instead of having only 3 minutes in round 4 prep skew. We disclose, which means they can prep us out, but we can't do the same to them. That creates a comparative disadvantage for the in-round abuse. This outweighs on scope of solvency. The judge can resolve 100% of the unfairness in this round, but there's no guarantee they can solve large structural impacts. 5 misdisclosure round reports allow checking back against misdisclosure by verifying what arguments were read, allowing for better, more predictable clash, and deterring abuse. 6 innovation. Round reports show collapse threats, deterring using the same strat every round and forcing greater backup threats. This disincentivizes flooding the wikis and seems to know what arguments people actually go for in practice. Under review. Drop the debater 2 reasons. Number 1, it's no different. Same as dropping the arguments of the argument. It's the entire case that wasn't disclosed. 2, norm setting voting for us sets a precedent in favor of possible debate. Wins and losses determine direction of that can be competing interests. 2 reasons. 1, reasonability invites arbitrary judgment since we don't know your BS meter. 2, collapses competing terms. We justify 2 violence and are often done to defensive paradigm just like 2 interps. No RBIs. 3 reasons. 1, it's illogical. You can win for being fair. It's a litmus test for engaging in substance. B, norming. I can to the counter if I realize I'm wrong, which forces me to argue for bad norms. 3, baiting. Abusive debaters are good, really good at baiting theory and just good at the argument debate, creating a chilling effect on theory, which isn't inviting people from checking back abuse. Second off. Interpretation: the negative debater must the negative debater must read either a standard or role of a valid violation. You don't. We'll specify the role of a valid is truth testing and the standard is util, but theory should come first. Standards first. Time skew. We take time out of our constructive to read the role of a ballot, but they don't have to establishing a way to value the debate, which means we have to spend more time clarifying something while they don't. B is shifting offense. Debaters can shift out of their offense after first constructive if they don't read a role of a ballot, which means they can specify X group or framework, but change it multiple times later on the rounds. Third is clash. We could go the entire debate without them ever specifically mentioning how they want to center the debate, which means you are never able to clash with their argument because we don't even know what we are arguing against. You just have a bunch of random cards which could be reinterpreted in rebuttal depending on my constructive. D, resolvability. If there's a dispute about whether certain impacts matter at the end of the round, the judge has to intervene because there's no stable standard text to refer to. That causes gender differential, which outweighs. Voters, fairness. If I'm doing a good norm, you should too. B, if debate is structurally unfair, no one will do it in the first place. Education is the only portable skill people get out of the debate. Cross apply, no RBIs, drop debater warrants above. On case. The position is democracy, Wang 21. The emerging Chinese tech ecosystem is in more than 100 countries. Beijing's authoritarianism permeates its technosphere. The U.S. has attempted to counterpose its own system to the rest of the world, however. This competition is evil versus evil. The U.S. also practiced mass surveillance in Class 21. The world is horrified by the dysfunction of American democracy, highlights a dilemma. Until the U.S. fixes democracy at home, it'll be unable to fight authoritarianism abroad, specifically Markey 23. The continued proliferation of biometric data collection poses serious threats to America sliding into surveillance state. Enacting a federal moratorium is critical in safeguarding democracy. Affirming would catalyze a global democratic reaction. Wang 21. Washington supply an alternative to Chinese techno-authoritarianism. If it first reforms its biometric data, banning facial recognition allows U.S. politicians to work with like-minded governments to reinvigorate democracy and craft a techno-political system at home. The impact is authoritarianism, Diamond 20, famine, genocide, state collapse, civil war, and the main threats to security all stem from authoritarianism. Autocrats support terrorism, proliferate WMDs, and threaten neighbors. Nuclear war is the most important impact. It disproportionately hurts women, Diamond Note 8. Using a gender perspective adds to layer to understand the effects of nuclear war on humans. Women are biologically more vulnerable to ionizing radiation than men. Social effects of nuclear weapons are gendered. Women are often being the ones most affected in relation to psychological health, displacement, social stigma, and discrimination.
On your first off, why didn't you just ask us to disclose the round report for round 7? Because we disclosed round reports and full text docs for every single other round. Clearly, we just forgot.
Yeah, it's not my burden to tell you to enact a good norm. Like,
well, if we clearly follow the good norm, and we followed the good norm every single round for basically the entire year.
You didn't do it every single round, which is why this interpretation was read. I'm going to take a question. Let's go to your second contention about what is it? Aid theft. So your empiric tells me the UN is doing it in Jordan. So like, what relevance does the US have to like the UN like already doing it independent of US funding?
Because the US literally bankrolls the UN. They're a very big part of the UN's ability to even do what we are doing in Jordan.
So like, how much of like US funding, like what contextualization is there to that claim?
What?
Like what contextualization is there to that claim you just made?
I mean, it's simply true. Like, if we can find, we can read evidence later, but if you can find evidence that the US isn't a big part of the UN, then we can talk about that. I'll ask you a question though. Let's talk about democracy. So you're arguing that democracy is backsliding right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually,
I can take a question.
sure.
Yeah, so on your C1 about Israel, why is like privacy regulation not bipartisan?
Because people don't. What do you mean by like?
So like what exactly like does a political capital trade-off
Yeah,
on?
sure. So, for example, many Republicans like this recognition technology because it cracks down on crime. That for that example, that it's not going to be bipartisan. But even then, because of simply polarization for our evidence, when a Democratic president is trying to pass something, just because of party lines, they're going to try to oppose it, which is why PC uniquely or political capital uniquely is very, very important.
Okay, so I'm reading your Spivak evidence. It's talking about like regulatory bills in general. So like, why does this trade-off not happen regardless, independent of this one issue?
Because this is, okay, first of all, there are no examples of regulatory bills that are passing right now that could trigger the impact.
Exactly, because of gridlock.
What?
Like, that's your claim,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And when you pass the affirmative, then you basically are forcing them to pass something they don't want to pass, which then saps all PC.
I know. Like, I'm saying there's gridlock right now. So like, what solvency do you?
First of all, gridlock exists because of polarization, and we currently say for conceded evidence that Biden is able to overcome gridlock uniquely in the context of Israel. However, when you pass the affirmative, you force Biden to pass a very massive, very extreme legislation that is currently not popular, and just simply because of polarization will not be supported by everyone, which means Biden is not able to do what he wants to do.
Why is he uniquely able to do it in Israel right now?
Why? Because he has political capital. It's very, very simple.
But you just said we're in gridlock. Like, where's the contextualization here?
No, okay. Gridlock, so the way, okay, that's fine. Political capital is like a currency. When you build up some of it, you get to use it. We built up some because Biden hasn't done anything very, very extreme or very radical. However, that goes away in the end.
We'll take a minute rest.
Starting now.
I'm not ready. First, a counter-interpretation. Don't punish debaters who consistently disclose forgetting in one round. One, punishing debaters is a bad method to create change reward teams who have good norms overall. Otherwise, debaters double down on problematic practices because they will simply lose even if they mess up one time. But secondly, turn its race to the bottom continuous by mutual alterations of what constitutes perfect practices. Punish teams who already do good practices, which A, impacts the fairness and pushes teams that are debate space because they're unfairly punished. But B, it's a prerequisite to norm setting. There's no benefit to adhering to good norms. You'll get punished for not being perfect. Destroy theory as a tool and ruining the ability to fix actual more severe problems in the debate space. Go to their Cheryl. One, we have contact info disclosed on the wiki. Look at it. This solves. They could have just asked them. But second, turn against them because to break new. We asked them before they were around if they were going to break a new argument. We told them we weren't. They wouldn't tell us if they were breaking new. That A, Dex reciprocity. They knew we were breaking new, but so they could so they didn't have to waste time preparing arguments we had already disclosed. But B, it kills education because we didn't know what they were running. But thirdly, we didn't read any new arguments in round 7. There was literally no tangible harm to the shell. It was the same lane egg that was disclosed in previous rounds. This is all hypothetical harm. We're actually talking about the real harms of creating frivolous theory and debate. Then go to their argument about competing in terms. They say it checks back on judge intervention, but this is inevitable. Judges have different evaluation of paradigm issues in debate and substance argument, so this is triggers in either world. But on their second standard, we saw that. Anyway, default to reasonability. First, you can't vote off potential abuse. It's impossible to verify if there are actual marginal consequences to their theoretical norm. They can show how our lack of disclosing in a single round has destroyed their ability to debate or engage. There's no actual abuse. It doesn't justify dropping the debater. But second, turn it against them because of predictability. Competing interpretations incentivize teams to race to the margins and choose unexpected interpretations to win on theory or substance. That A, kills fairness. There's no way to prepare and anticipate their interpretations, which gives teams introducing theory and inherited advantage, but B, destroys education. Instead of debating substance, teams just go for squirrely theory, which destroys the ability to do real-world policy making. Go to their role in the valid shell. Counter-interpretation, you don't need to read a valid and constructive. Then on their shell specifically, one will agree to the role of the valid, but secondly, recognize it's so vague that it doesn't actually focus the debate at all and doesn't meet any of their standards. On time skew specifically, one, delinking, it took them literally 5 seconds to read the role of the valid. There's no time skew given that we didn't. But secondly, turn it against them because we're speaking first. There's time skew against first summary because they have to spend and respond to a 4-minute rebuttal in 3 minutes. If anything, that's a more tangible harm. But thirdly, it's not unique. There are all sorts of other factors that contribute to time skew in the activity, such as people speaking much faster or reading more arguments. Then they talk about shifting offense in the round. One, it's non-unique. They allow weighing under the role of the ballot, which means we can still shift offense just by doing different weighing. But secondly, it's non-unique because people collapse on different arguments throughout the round, which shifts offense anyway, even if they have this general role of the ballot. Then we talk about clash. One, the role of the ballot is super general, so it doesn't promote clash at all. You prefer our argument. But then on this argument about reciprocity or therefore standard, recognize that weighing solves this argument by allowing us to focus the debate. Then cross-apply what I read to reasonability on this shell. Then go to their argument about democracy. One, the U.S. is leading effectively, global democracy is up. 4 out of all 23 rights. Or actually, wait, first. We'll agree that theory comes first. This argument doesn't matter, but then some quick responses, like U.S. is leading effectively. The U.S. is leading effectively, global democracy is up. 4 out of all 23 rights. That the struggle for democracy may be approaching a turning point. 34 countries made improvements. The tally of country which has climbed was the smallest on record since the negative pattern began. But second, turn it seeding the market. Sharma 21 writes that the emerging market dominance of countries like Russia and China for biometric data, a better approach would be to create a visible gold standard, use cape operating procedure and governance structure. Should the U.S. become a player, the standard setting efforts would carry more weight. America could raise the industry bar in terms of consideration of human rights. That A links to the argument. Expanding digital authoritarianism causes democratic backsliding, but be it always on probability, other countries have the incentive to procure new tech in either world. The only difference is the quality of tech. Then, just overall in the theory debate, on their first shell, recognize that none of their standards are specific to round reports at all, and plus we disclose round reports regardless, so all of the arguments I made are applied there, but at the end of the day, they're making really silly minor theoretical quibbles when we already do good practices. We don't paraphrase, we disclose our arguments before rounds so they know what we're running, we send them speech docs so they can check back on our evidence, and they're mad because in a single round we forgot to disclose. That does not justify... We forgot to do round reports. We didn't even forget to disclose. So that doesn't justify dropping the debater. It's TOC quarters. Come on, let's have a real round. And then
Is everyone good?
Yep.
On their counter-interpretation, first, apologies don't solve it's a norm-setting argument, which means there's no way that they're actually going to access any office here. But the second, it's completely unverifiable. They just forgot. It's just incentivized teams to say they forgot and just have bad norms, which is obviously bad because it means that there's no theory can ever check back because people are going to always get back out of it, which by saying they forgot, which outweighs because if the theory can't check back, that means infinite abuse outweighs everything around. But then they say that like it's a race to the bottom, but you can turn this because we would say it's not a race to the bottom because the only way they can prove it's a race to the bottom in this specific argument round is if they prove that our harms are marginal, our harms are not marginal, because they can see literally every single one of our standards on our case on our shell about how it's an in-round scheme. This round specifically, they have to prove it's a marginal harm, and if they don't have round reports. They say they put up round reports, but that they disclose probably that's literally not true. Look at we don't have any disclosure for round 4. They say confident info. 4 responses. This doesn't solve for the debate space. Asking checks back for in-round abuse, but not circuit norm setting. Second, it puts the burden of checking for fairness on us instead of being fair just in the first place. That encourages the abuse. Since we either ask and there's no loss for them, or we don't, they just get away with extra responses. Third, even if this is true, we are still debating that our interp is the best model of debate. This should have fallen under the community interp. And fourth, this is contingent upon me catching the fact that they misdisclosed. They tell you that they're breaking new, but realize that we couldn't tell them if we're breaking new because we didn't know what their strat was. Our strat depended on them. We tailored it to them. I.e., they read an economy argument. We might read an economy dissent. They say that there's going to be they say that they don't have new arguments, but the A to the debate about the model of debate. B is this is completely unverifiable. And C, even if this is true, they should have put it on their wiki that their argument for round 7 was the same, but they didn't, which means it's bad. On our shelf specifically, at the end of the day, no RVIs goes cold conceded coming out of first rebuttal, which means if you buy 100% of their offense on the theory debate, you cannot vote for it. They also concede that theory comes from substance in their last speech, which means it's game over in second rebuttal. That is completely conceded. Let's move on to our they say none of these are specific to disclosure and round reports. Literally, the 6 and 7 standard on disclosure, literally talking about round reports specifically. Then they give you all this argument about a minor infraction. A minor infraction does not matter because we tell you there's a specific in-round skew, i.e., I don't know what they read in round 7. They couldn't break no. It's unfair probability. They did it. I can't put their arguments out. I also don't know what their collapse strats are because I don't know what their collapse strats are on the end of round 7. Whereas they know what my collapse strats are, which means they can tailor their advocacy, their rebuttal strats to mine. I can't tailor theirs to theirs, that to theirs, which is in-round abuse. This outweighs the way it's all cold conceded because in-round abuse, U.S. judge only has scope of policy for this round. Your generally doesn't create large structural impacts. On continued interpretations, they say reasonability and judge intervention inevitable. That's fine. You should still limit it as much as possible. They say don't put potential abuse. That's not that doesn't matter. This is literally TOC quarters. If you vote on potential abuse, it discourages teams from having lazy disclosure practices and saying that they forgot to get out of this. They say that it's a turn because it's a race to the bottom against already justice. It doesn't matter insofar as it's they have to prove that there's a marginal harm. They concede the abuse story of our case about how we don't have the ability to tailor rebuttal strats, which means it's completely cold. On their counter-interp, their competing interpretations literally just have any standards. Then they say all our standards are vague. There's no warrant why our standards on the roll of ballot off are vague. It's on the roll of ballot. My bad. On time skew is fine. This turn doesn't give them any offense because there's no reason why this time skew in the first or the second summary is a reason to vote for them. That's just regular debate norms. On shifting, they say it's non-unique. No, just because they can go for different arguments doesn't mean you can shift out their arguments. If you read a new roll of ballot, that means that I can literally not weigh my arguments under your roll of ballot because something that's specifically tailored to your arguments. They say, they can collapse for different arguments, which also makes it non-unique. No, if I collapse, you can still weigh the argument under the same roll of ballot, i.e. Truth testing. Truth testing is not vague. It's literally just saying whether or not the resolution is true or not. On resolvability, the response to this is terrible. They just say, oh, we can still have weighing with checks back. That's literally not what the standard is at all. The standard is, at the end of the day, if the judge doesn't know what to vote on, i.e. they don't have a specific standard, it doesn't matter with the weighing because they don't know how to evaluate the weighing in the first place. You can only weigh under a roll of the ballot. At the end of the day, it is super plain. If you got 100% office, no RBS is conceded, which means you cannot vote for them on theory. On the CI, on roll of ballots, there are no standards, which means even if we win marginal offensive cell, you immediately pull the trigger there, it's game.
Are you reading off the doc?
For some of it, I'll send that. That's my thing.
Okay, so given that we've disclosed and done round reports for literally every single other tournament this season, along with every single round plus doubles except for round 7, why is it likely that our norm of disclosure is quote-unquote unverifiable?
What do you mean?
How is it unverifiable that we support the norm of disclosure when we have literally done it for every single tournament, every single round of this tournament, except for one case where we broke off?
The unverifiability argument is not like, oh, whether or not you support it. The unverifiability argument is whether or not you just forgot to. And the fact is, if you're reading this counter
what is
interpretation,
the alternative? Like, if we, so you agree we support
alternative
it,
is disclosing
right?
properly.
Okay, no, I'm saying, like, if the explanation for us not disclosing in round 7 is not, we forgot, what is it?
It's, we didn't disclose properly, we're going to lose this round now.
No, because you've agreed we support the norm of disclosure. Clearly we've
What?
decided it's a
I
good
never
thing.
said
since
that.
we do. Yes, you did. You said
Okay,
our argument
okay.
is not that you don't support it.
If
Implying
I-
you agree that we support it, given
Hey, that's
again
fine.
you
If
disclosed
I go up here and say I support
the norm of disclosure.
anti-racism and then say a racial slur, that obviously means that there's a reason to down me. Like, just because you
That's
can say that you
true.
claim you support this model and then you violate that model, that's a reason to down you.
No, it's not, because teams that, there's no incentive to comply to good models if you make a mistake and instantly lose for it. If you make a mistake and can't apologize for it, can't correct that mistake, then like, what's the point of changing practices at all?
We've been on the
It
spot. Can I have a question?
It underpins the entire idea underlying theory, which is
can I
that
have a
if you
question?
make a mistake, you change your practices.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
Cool. What's your offense in this round?
We have so much of it. There were 2 standards on our counter interpretation. We read DAs to your competing interp argument. We read a DA on your shell of disclosure.
If no RBS is conceded by both sides, how can judges vote for you?
Pretty simple. RBRs are simply an argument that if there's defensive reasons why your theory shell isn't true, then, and you read like competing interpretations or whatever, if there's a risk of offense, we should vote for you. The problem is, we've read 2 things. I'm gonna answer your question.
All right, yeah, sure.
We've read 1, that logic underpinning it is false. Since you're saying we should stake this round on dropping the debater if the harm is incredibly marginal, we think that's a bad
This
idea.
is not
But
false.
secondly, on top of that, we've read a bunch of pieces of offense. So this argument that
Right.
defensive reasons don't win you the round
Okay.
just doesn't apply
Really
since
quick.
we've read offense.
Really quick, I want to clarify something. RBIs doesn't only apply to defense. Even if you win
No, it
offense on the
does.
theory debate, even if you win offense on the theory debate and you don't win RBIs, that literally means that, cool, the judge can grant you this offense, but it's not
Okay,
a voting
define-
issue.
Define RBIs for me.
Reverse voting issue.
Okay, so what is a reverse voting issue?
It means if I engage in the theory debate and then you have offense, i.e. the reverse of my
This is a
shell,
horrible definition because this means
I'm
if
giving you
we
the definition of
respond to your
reverse.
theory shell, if we read any kind of theory, all it means is that whoever introduces theory first always wins. If we can literally
No.
never respond to theory without losing. Like this is obviously untrue.
okay, then you should read, at least you should read more as to why that's bad. But this is cold conceded coming out of it.
No, because A, you don't define RBIs, and B, the like literal definition of them is only defensive warrants. None of your arguments justify this framing that there's any
I'm
responsibility.
sorry that we had to define RBIs.
Yeah, I'm sorry you don't know what the definition is.
We'll quickly start with this argument about RBIs being conceded, and then it'll go to our counter interp to not punish debaters, then their interp on disclosure, and then their interp on roll ballots.
Wait, can you say that again?
Yeah, so it'll start just on your argument that RBIs are conceded, then it'll go to our counter interp that like we shouldn't punish debaters, and then go to your disclosure interp, and then go to your interp about roll ballots.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Anybody not ready? Awesome. On RBIs are conceded. First, if we win office on any of our DAs or counter interps that implicates to the theory layer, these are not defensive arguments, does not matter for the sake of RBIs. Even for us, we don't even define an RBI in their speech talk, and none of their standards justify this margin. But second, their definition of RBIs legitimately destroys debate. It means that whoever reads theory first will always win. win because any responses, even if they're offensive, do not matter. But then, extend our counter injure, do not punish debaters who consistently disclose for forgetting in one round. Extend these race to the bottom standard, continuous minute alteration of what constitutes perfect practices, punishes teams who already do good practices, which A, impacts the fairness, and pushes teams out of the debate because they are unfairly punished, but second, it prerequisite to norm setting. There is no benefit to adhering to good norms, because you'll get punished for not being perfect, destroying theory as a tool, and thus ruining the ability to fix actual problems in the debate space. Outweigh on severity. If all teams stop doing actually good norms, they stop not paraphrasing, they stop disclosing, etc., the harms are so much worse on a much greater scale than them not seeing a round report for one single round when they can see our emails are literally right there. They could have emailed us if they care so much about our collab strategy in one round. But then their only response is that harms are not marginal, but clearly if we disclose and did round report for again every round, it is very marginal. They have ways to solve back. But then they can see we did not read anything new. Email chains proof for this. At that point, go to their intro. Extend predictability. Competing interims incentivizes teams to race to the margin and choose the unexpected interest to win on theory or substance. Two implications. First, it kills fairness. There's no way to repair or participate. There are interpretations which gives teams interesting theory and inherent advantage. Second, that's education. Instead of debating substance, teams just go for this poorly theory which lacks the ability to do real policy making. They can see judge interventions and never go at that point. You minimize it through predictability. But then quickly go back to our counter to the violation. They punish the team and talk to debaters exact same argument as theirs in norm setting. All this show about road to the ballot though. Cross out race to the bottom. It stops the ability to run theory in the first place. For that same race, you can also cross out predictability. It works here as well. But then other specific standards on time skew. Explain that it is completely non-unique. There's first speaking, there's fast speaking people. There's a time skew of not reading a quote-unquote roll of the ballot is absolutely minuscule. They can see there are much greater causes, i.e. speaking first. That means that even if you believe that maybe there's an increase, it does not matter. The harms is already done. But on shifting offense, they can see that they can shift offense through a collapse shot, going for a different argument, reading a new way, and all triggers the exact same argument is clean conceded. But third, on clash, this is absolutely this is incredibly vague. You have no idea what even kind of clash you are voting for in this case. The clash that actually gets promoted is having a normal substance on it. It's TOC porters who literally they stop us from having an actual good debate by reading this terrible theory. Okay. Anything else? But again, remember, we literally asked them, are you breaking new? And they told us, we don't know. We told them very explicitly, we are breaking new to make this round as high quality as possible and as fair as possible. They literally made it an unfair round by not telling us what they're going to read. If they care about the disclosure of good norms, they would have told us if they're breaking new or not. That clearly shows they do not care about disclosure. It's at least as big of a harm as their marginal not reading a round report for round 7. Very clean.
Alright, we're gonna take a breath.
Okay, do you have the kills education and fairness response on my disclosure show right now? So just point me to that. I didn't catch that during the speech.
Are you talking about us?
Yeah.
What do you ask me for?
On my show, I didn't catch your response about kills education and fairness. Is that somewhere typed
Yeah,
out?
that's in our speech doc. So what we extended is the race to the bottom standard and the counter interpretation, and then the DA to your competing interpretation method of predictability.
Okay.
Start time.
Sorry, how much prep do y'all left?
We stopped at 150, we took 25 before, so we had 45 left.
30. We took 36. 36.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so 156. We're just gonna start. I'm gonna start with no RBIs, then I'll extend the roll of the ballot shelf, then I'll go to the disclosure bit. Yeah. Is anyone not ready?
Wait.
Yeah.
No RBIs, roll
Yeah.
the ballot shell, disclosure.
Disclosure, like debate. I'll
Okay,
maybe
yeah, please satisfy me.
For
Yeah.
the disclosure debate, which,
I'll start on your counter answer.
okay.
Okay. On no RBIs. Number one, don't grant them new responses. Literally, this was conceded coming out of rebuttal. They say specifically that they have offensive standards, but our standards literally apply if you're reading offense or not. If you're roasting ordering issues, if you have an offensive counter interpretation, you don't even win under that. Extend the baiting standards that abusive reader tool get baiting theory and get really good at the argument, creating a chilling effect which disenfranchises people from checking back to It doesn't matter if the standard that the abusive debater reads is offensive or defensive. We specifically tell you creates a chilling effect where people will never read theory in the first place. And this was cold conceded. This outweighs on magnitude because it means that people will never read theory, which means all of the abuses will never get rectified. They say we'll destroy the debate because the abusive debater will always win. That is our argument per the chilling effect. And we tell you that if you have no RBIs, you can still win if you just read defense of the counter term and go for substance. This is like completely new. It shouldn't even be on your flow. At that point, they conceded that theory comes over substance, so the only risk of offense is us. Go to the spec roll of ballot. First, I'm going to extend it. Interpretation, the other two must read, in the first construction must either read a standard rule of ballot violation, you don't, will specify the rule of ballot choose something, and a standard is to and theory should come first. Extend the standard by shifting offense. Debaters can shift other offense after considering if they don't read a rule of ballot, which means they can specify extra referring, but change it multiple times later throughout the round. Their only response is that you can still do the three things like weighing, etc. But our response specifically is that that would not kick you out of your offense. For example, you can weigh things under your rule of ballot, but if you read a completely new rule of the ballot, that takes me out of all of my offense to the point where I can't weigh or link into that rule of the ballot. This was cold conceded. That point extend the warrants about fairness, that this links in fairness because it creates unfair models where people just get excluded out of the base space, and if debate is structurally unfair, no one would agree. We both agreed to drop the debater, etc. Okay. Weigh this against the disclosure shell because this comes to a prior question of the disclosure shell. If the role of the ballot is functionally excluded, that means people can never link in, etc. And there was like clear violations. They didn't do it in this round. Okay, now let's go to their counter interpretation on the disclosure shell. Extend the response about unverifiability. They can see that people will just say whatever to take out of disclosure, and the fact that we don't know if they actually forget. This outweighs because they can see the fact that people will infinite abuse because people will never actually follow these norms and create excuses like my opponents. This outweighs their own thing about race to the bottom because it means that theory will never be able to check back for the abuse, which outweighs all of the impacts that they talk about, and people will be pushed out outweighing unfairness. Okay, go to my disclosure shell. First, extend it. Interpretation debaters at the CUC must on the open case of the year 2022 to 2023 review their names, school to attend, disclose timelines, school settings, cover to entries of evidence at least 30 minutes per round. Violation, they don't disclose TOC round 7. Extend the standard about prep skew. We disclose which things they can prep us out, but we can't do the same for them. That creates a comparative disadvantage training in round abuse. This outweighs on scope of solemnity. The judge can resolve 100% of the unfairness in this round, but there's no guarantee they can solve large structural impacts. That outweighs their counter-interpretation as well. On competing in terms, the only thing they say is that judge intervention is inevitable. They can see the fact that you should minimize judge intervention as much as possible. At that point, they don't even extend their counter-interpretation on rule of ballot. So even if you don't buy like competing in terms, like there's no CI or no standards on the spec shop. All right, rule of ballot. Good for granted.
You can say a question.
We don't really have a question. You can have one.
I don't have a question.
How's your day?
It's good. How's yours?
Going great.
Okay.
Wait. Clarify what offense are you going for in the round?
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
Or like what's on the table for you right now?
Everything you can see.
So what is that?
I mean, that's kind of a skill issue if you don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll take the question then. So given we clearly do care about norms, if we disclose every single time and you put a check back with contact info, how is that like malicious intent and how will that erode norms?
It's not verifiable. Also, it doesn't matter.
Non-verifiable. Our emails are right there. It is very verifiable that you could have literally asked us.
All the responses to ask us were conceded.
No.
And not extended in the last speech.
Well, contact info wasn't in your summary.
Yeah, it was. It was like
Not
very
in your
much in my summary. Yeah, it definitely was.
Also, there's still no reason why contact you solves back for this.
Oh, there's a very, very simple reason. It's that if you see, oh, they literally disclosed a round report for one round, let me just email them to ask them what they ran. If it is so important to your round strategy, and it's very clear that we care about these norms, it is so simple and it is so obvious that we actually don't care about these kinds of like norms. We didn't just ask us.
All right, you can have a question.
That was my question.
All right, you can have another one.
Okay. Okay, sure. So, okay, on roll of the ballot, on this roll of the ballot, intro.
Yeah.
So if there's like 8,000 other reasons why times 2 is created.
I didn't go for that standard. That's fine.
Okay, it's fine. Want to take a question?
Sure. Actually, I mean, you can have another one, I guess.
I've already taken all the questions.
Okay. What were your like responses on reasonability versus CI?
Sorry?
Was it just intervention is inevitable? Is that it?
Yeah, sure. Our
Okay.
responses.
You can have a question.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so we just basically said that you concede that to the all this intervention is inevitable. At that point, you can minimize it through predictability. If that makes
Okay,
sense.
do you want a question?
Okay. So I guess on the disclosure shell, just I guess which standards you go for?
Prep skew.
Prep skew for disclosure, and then y'all conceded that you guys created a prep skew by not telling us if you were breaking new or not.
Like, what relevance does that have?
Very, very big relevance to the point that it completely changes our prep strategy, and we have no idea
not
if
a
you all are
standard
breaking
of the
new or
CI.
not. That's fine.
Okay. It's going to be starting on our disclosure counter interpretation, and then their roll of the ballot shell, and then their disclosure shell. Is anyone not ready?
Wait, so your counter their role of the ballot thing, their disclosure shell?
Yeah. Okay. Everyone good? We could have spent this round talking about the harms and benefits of biometric recognition technology, but instead they staked it on silly theoretical quibbles. Extend our counter-interpretation. Don't punish debaters who consistently disclose for forgetting in one round. Violation they did. Race to the bottom is dropped. Continuous minute alterations of what constitutes perfect practices. Punishes teams who already do good practices. Drop the debater. We co-opt the same warrants as them. They make 2 responses. First, that no RFDs mean we can't extend our argument. 1, none of this warranting was extended in their rebuttal speech. Don't grant it. Secondly, this is literally a skill issue. If you're bad at debate, the good debaters are of course going to beat you. This is non-unique. But thirdly, it doesn't apply to offensive arguments. It's only about defensive. Warning offenses to why their arguments are actively bad. That's just a chilling effect against us if we're winning those. Then they say that it justifies infinite abuse. 1, they've cold conceded that contact information falls back. Our emails are on the wiki. We were texting them before the round. They could have asked us to disclose. The solution if someone makes a mistake isn't to punish them. It's to ask them, call them out on their practices and give them a chance to correct it. They didn't even give us that. But secondly, they've conceded the fact that clearly our norms are good and we actually do support disclosure. We don't perpetuate the infinite violations they talk about because we have disclosed at literally every single other tournament and done round reports for every single round. It was a mistake. This outweighs their role of the ballot and disclosure shells. A is a prerequisite. There's no benefit to adhering to good norms and get punished for not being perfect, destroying theories that tool and thus ruining the ability to fix actual problems in the debate space. This answers their prerequisite because it operates at a higher level and broader scope. But B, it outweighs the severity. If all teams stop doing actually good norms, their harms are so much worse than the extent to which people collapse or exchange across the board. Go to the roll of the ballot shell. They extend the standard that we could theoretically read or extend our counter interpretation. You don't need to read a roll of the ballot. They say that the standard that you could introduce a new roll of the ballot and that back half, which destroys fairness, but one, they've conceded that collapsing to different arguments creates this, it's not unique because that creates the same harms of unpredictability, but secondly, this would just be treated as a new arc which solves back. I already answered their prerequisite. On disclosure, they've cold conceded the break new DA, which is specifically, we asked them if we were breaking new in the round, we told them we were, they didn't tell us. That destroys education because they knew we didn't have to prep old stuff that we had disclosed, but comparatively we had no idea what they're running. That's at least the same level of harm as the marginal violation they proved.
Alright, it's gonna be RBIs, their disclosure shell, actually the RBIs, our role about shell, then their disclosure counter verification. Does that make sense? Alright. Very good. Extend the warrant for RBIs. We're literally telling you that RBIs cannot be allowed because it creates a chilling effect where if you have RBIs and abusive behavior, just get the theory debate, which means no one can read theory because the fact that they know they're going to lose, which creates a chilling effect because no one reads theory, which means you can't check out abuse that creates infinite abuse, which they can see outweighs literally all their impacts on magnitude. And they also can see that none of this was in rebuttal. They say we didn't extend the rebuttal. Why do you have to extend the rebuttal? It makes no sense. Then they tell you that contact info would solve back for this round. It doesn't matter. It's an RBIs debate about whether the norm of theory should have RBIs. The contact info in this round doesn't matter at all. They say like, oh, it's only for defensive, it's not offensive. That's not true. Even if you give them offense, it's a voting issue. You give them offense, but you cannot vote on it because it's not a voting issue. That being said, extend competing interpretation. They can see that it's reasonability glasses you competing interpretations because of the fact that it's a bright line for what is reasonable. At that point, they don't extend a single counter. They don't extend a counter interpretation on disclosure shell in final, and they don't extend the competing interpretation on a roll of ballot in summary, which means there is no competing interpretation on either on the shells, which means there is no offense immediately. There's also no standard extended on disclosure on our shell, but that doesn't matter. Move on to roll of ballot extended. The negative debater must read either a standard or rule of ballot violation. You don't specify the rule of ballot truth testing a standard truth tool. The theory should come first. Our argument about shifting offense debaters should have their offense on the judgment. They read the rule of ballot, which means they can specify a group or framework and chase the multiple and play later round. They just say it's not unique because they can collapse for a different argument. Yes, but I can still weigh against that argument. If you specify a different role of the ballot that I cannot weigh under, then I'm literally skewed out of the round because I cannot interact with the argument. I have no way to win the round. This argument is cold conceded, which they also concede the fairness outweighs because of the fact that every argument sees the intrinsic value of fairness, which means you're obviously preferring RMX and fairness of theirs. On their CI, they cold concede the turn that since the counter interpretation says the word forget, and forget is completely unverifiable, that means that people can just use the excuse of forgetting to mean that no theory is ever going to work because everyone can just get out of it by using the excuse. This kills theory because of the fact that no theory will work, and that's infinite magnitude. The reason you prefer this over their thing about prereq is because it outweighs our scope. They just say, oh, they have a broader scope with no warranty, and people can definitely use the excuse of forgetting in way more rounds than their thing about race to the bottom. Plus, they have to prove that that's specifically happening here. At the end of the day, they have this dissat. It's not under competing interpretation. Yeah, they don't extend it. It's not under competing interpretations. It's game, no argument.
An interesting round. I have judged 3 of you 4 before, and I just want to congratulate you all on making it here. This is a huge achievement, and you should all pat yourselves on the back after this. This was really impressive. With that said, the decision was a 2-1 for the negative from Blake.
Yeah, I scrolled. So I affirm. I affirm for Southlake on the roll of the ballot shell. I think that this round is exceedingly messy. I had to intervene. I'm sure that the 2 other judges are probably going to say that they had to intervene. I don't feel really comfortable with the decision that I had to make. But here's how I saw it. So first thing is I need to decide whether I think Blake even extends offense. I think Southlake is right. Counterinterp to the role of the ballot shell is not in summary. I disagree that there's no extension to the counterinterp to disclosure and final. I think that is there. So then I have to figure out the weighing between the broadly conceded arguments. So I think Blake is winning this prereq on norm setting, and that's conceded. But I just don't have an interaction between Southlake's weighing, which is the fairness stuff, and Blake's prereq to norm setting. I do think you try to put ink on this. The ink is new and final, and the standard of norm setting has been the same since rebuttal. So I'm not, like, the interaction comes way too late for me. But if you think about what the fairness claim is, there is no interaction with norm setting whatsoever. They're completely distinct claims, and I don't have I have 2 scope arguments from each team that the scope of fairness is larger and that the scope of norm setting is larger, but no comparison of the scope arguments either. So I just have no way of actually comparing these two weighing mechanisms for arguments that I think are broadly probably won. So I just like have to kind of look at strength of link as my only tiebreaker for these two arguments, or at least that's the way that I think makes the most sense. So I think Southlake is definitely winning the role of ballot shell. I agree that the only Blake response is through ink. They've conceded the claim in the summary that changing your in-round strategy within the same role of the ballot doesn't completely force you to kick out of your offense. And instead you can just change your weighing strategy. I think this is sufficient frontline to the non-unique, and the argument's 100% won. And then for the counter-interp, I would have to decide whose conception of RVIs is correct. And this is why the decision takes me so long, is that Blake is right. They just are. That is how an RVI works. And I think this is basically a paradigm issue, so I just have to spend a long time deciding whether or not I'm willing to intervene harder to say that, no, this is a paradigm issue, Blake's conception of RVIs is correct, and I'm willing to give them the full offense on their counter-interpretation, on disclosure, which I think is clean, and then figure out the weighing. But I think with a stricter adherence to the flow and less to my personal opinions about theory, like I just sort of have to vote on what I think is cleaner. I think the role of the ballot shell is cleaner, even though I think that Blake is broadly correct about the conception of what an RVI is.
Yeah, I can go next. I'll just say, like, I'm also equally, like, not super certain in my decision. I think that this was a really blippy round on a lot of the basic things, like extending your arguments, extending internal links, and doing actual comparative weighing. If that had been done, it wouldn't have taken me like 10-15 minutes to make a decision. And I think like both sides would be more satisfied with the reason I end up like voting. I look at the RVI debate first because I think it determines access to offense on the theory layer in the round. I think Southlake is solidly ahead here. The neg says that Southlake dropped the argument in rebuttal. I don't know why they need to extend it in rebuttal for me to evaluate it. You also say that their like warrant is about defense, not offense. But their warrant says that I shouldn't give Blake offense because if I do, it incentivizes good theory debaters to bait theory by being intentionally abusive and weakens debaters' ability to use theory to check back against abuse. This pretty clearly implicates the offense. I don't get a warrant why it doesn't. Southlake also says that this outweighs the other arguments on magnitude because it trickles down to every single theory round. So I'm disinclined to vote on your offense even if you win. Like I end up presuming for you, long story short, and I'll explain how I get there. And I'm not happy to have had to do that in quarters of TOC, but like that's what happens. I then look at the theory debate proper. Southlake says that I should prefer their theory shell because the role of the ballot is a prior question to how judges can evaluate the round. Blake tells me that their disclosure CI is a prior question because it has a broader scope and ultimately determines like whether debaters generally abide by good norms. Neither side does a comparative between the two weighing mechs. I think Blake's makes more sense that their scope is larger, so that's why I end up looking at disclosure first. Like ultimately, when there's no comparative and it gets as blippy as it does, like I'm just gonna have to make a decision at some point, or I could just like presume from the get-go, which I don't think would make anyone happy. I look at disclosure. I think Blake is ahead on disclosure. Southlake doesn't extend the actual harm of not having the round 7 round report and final focus, so I default to Blake's CI because I think it's extended better. Given the no RVIs issue, however, I'm forced to treat Blake's CI as terminal defense on the disclosure issue. Instead, what I would otherwise think is a round-ending offensive issue that would allow me to just sign my ballot for you. I then look at the role of the ballot because this is the last like offensive thing in the round. I think Southlake is comfortably ahead here. Blake says collapsing causes the same harm as specifying a role of the ballot, so the issue is non-unique. Southlake says that the debaters can still weigh against collapse strategies, and role of the ballot's fundamentally box voting issues out of the round. Neither side does a great comparative, but I think Southlake's front line, again, is probably better than Blake's by the end of the round and like makes more intuitive sense. Final focus and summary from both sides are blippy, but because your counter-interps are smaller and like more, I think, like easy to say in fewer words, your extensions are less blippy than their extensions, right? The role of the ballot thing is complex and requires a more time devoted to extensions, and that time isn't there. Like in final focus, I straight up did not hear why your standard impacts to fairness, why fairness is a voter, or why I should drop the debater. Like, these are things that have to be in final focus, and if they're not, like, I'm not voting on theory, okay? I'm not gonna give you offense on your shell at that point, like, because you're not extending the stuff that I think you have to extend. So because there's terminal defense on the one offensive issue, you don't have offense on the other thing, and my paradigm says I presume to the first picking team, I vote for you. That's my decision.